I'd like to welcome everyone to this year's Social Workers Confronting Racial Injustice Conference with our focus this year of Women at the Forefront. My name is Jenny Braunginn, and I'm very honored to be the conference chair this year. As I'm speaking, I want to point out the slides on either screen that describe our conference theme, but also list our overall conference goals. As you can see, this is a conference for challenging social workers to engage in racial and social justice action. We not only know that social justice challenge is one that's mandated in our code of ethics, but we know that all of you are here because you want to learn more about some of the many ways to go about the social and racial justice work as a social worker in particular. Before we get started today, I wanted to take care of just some basic information to help your day go more smoothly. The restrooms are just outside the door here on the way towards the stairs, and these are gender-based restrooms, and if you want to use gender-inclusive restrooms, we're told that Union South has one on the 3rd floor. We also have a health room that's available for nursing your baby or for any kind of similar needs in that regard. So please ask one of our conference staff at the registration table, and they can call and set up the appropriate room for your use. There are 2 important additions to our conference this year, as we have a conference website and a Twitter account. And so inside your folder, they're both listed on the conference agenda, and inside your folder on the bottom left. To tweet the event, use hashtag SWConfrontInjustice. You'll notice that that's on your bottom pocket there. And the conference website also has additional information, the more detailed biographies about all of our workshop speakers for you. In your conference packet, there's a schedule of today's events, workshop information and locations with a map, and an evaluation form. So please be sure to fill out the evaluation form today at the end and turn it in when you leave. And as you can see by our large attendance, we have very full workshops and a lot of people here today. So please make sure that you attend the workshop that's indicated on your name tags. That's the ones that you chose when you registered. We will stick to our time frame as closely as possible. We have a really busy day, so also pay attention to the times listed on the different workshops and on your agenda. The room that we're in now, this is Varsity. This is also the location for both of our keynote speakers, for our lunch, and the innovation panel. And at lunchtime, if you are a person who had requested special foods or special dietary needs, please let the food servers know at that time, and they will make sure to get you the appropriate meal. For people wanting CEUs today, the certificates will be available at the end of the day, and make sure that when you go to your workshops that you sign in for your attendance. And if you have any other questions about CEUs, again, at our registration table, they can help you out with that. On the back of your agenda is the list of people, the key people that we want to thank today. And I really would like to give a huge personal thank you to this year's Conference Planning Committee members, Laura Kalender, Jason Lee, Holly Pagel, Mary Palaskis, Aaron Rosh, and Angela Willits. If you see them around today, if any of you are in here, you can put your hands up. We also have other volunteers today from the School of Social Work, our student volunteers that are wearing the t-shirts that say School of Social Work. There are also people that can help you find your way around if you have any other questions. As we transition to our conference, I want to leave you with a thought to ponder on, besides looking at our goals there, that I hope when people leave today that we're able to show others what social workers really can do, that we're not just there to pick up the pieces once something has happened, but we're also there to be active change agents, to challenge and to change policies and programs to make a real proactive difference in our society so that we all may be able to be at the forefront. I'm now extremely proud and very pleased to introduce the director of UW-Madison School of Social Work, Professor Stephanie Robert, to do our welcome today. Dr. Robert.
Hopefully Symone is just my height when she comes up. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Jenny, for welcoming everybody. This conference has been a labor of love for the committee that's worked on it. So Jenny listed everybody who's worked so hard on this committee, but I want to give a huge thank you to Jenny. We've been planning this conference for a year now, and Jenny has led the organization of this conference for the last few years and has done an outstanding job. And I don't know how, but the conference seems to get better and better every year, and it was already good, you know. So I think this lineup looks terrific. So special thank you to Jenny. I also want to thank all the donors to the School of Social Work who make this conference possible. As you know, students get to attend this conference for free. Those of you who are community members get to attend at a pretty nominal fee and get CEUs for it. And this year we were able to afford our first national speaker, Symone Sanders, who I'll get to introduce to you in a few minutes. So I particularly want to gratefully acknowledge the gifts from the Maureen Pelton Hartwell Fund for Women's Rights, the Tamara Grigsby Memorial Fund for Diversity and Inclusion, and Teresa and David Beck-Engel, and from other donors to the School of Social Work. I know there's many alumni in this room who graciously give to the school, and so we pooled those funds to have events like this as well. So thank you all for donating. So I'm curious, how many of you have read the book by Adrienne Marie Brown called Emergent Strategy: Shaping Change, Changing Worlds? Anybody read it? Hey, Mary Pulaskis, yes. Okay, well, a special shout out to Lane Hansen, who is one of our alums from the program and brought this book to my attention. The author, Adrienne Marie Brown, refers to herself as a social justice facilitator, healer, and doula living in Detroit, complicated lady. And she has very deep experience in doing social justice work. And again, the book is called Emergent Strategy. As with all books, this book had ideas that didn't necessarily resonate with me, but it had a lot of ideas that really inspired me and challenged me. What I particularly liked about this book and why I'm bringing up and recommending it as reading to people in this room is that given the time we're in now, it seems important to not only do social justice work, but there's an increasing importance to be in relationship and develop relationship and understanding with others while doing social justice work. For me, I experience frequently this tension between focusing on action and developing relationship and understanding, and I've been feeling this tension more during our current political times more than ever. If this tension resonates with you, I really suggest that you read this book. This is a social justice advocate who is really talking about how we can do this work while being in relationship. And today, we're going to be talking about action, but who do we have in this room? We have over 500 social workers, budding social workers, and fellow social justice colleagues, all in one room. So it's a great opportunity to explore, to support each other, and to celebrate all the good stuff that's going on. So let's not only learn from each other about what to do with social action, but let's reach out to each other and work on developing relationship and talk about what we can be doing in our communities to further develop relationship in the work that we're doing. All right, now I'm supposed to introduce Symone, but I don't see her yet.
She's here.
Okay. So again, this book that I just referred to is called Emergent Strategy. And what I suggest is that some of you read it, maybe get a group of friends together to read it. Some of you may have a book group already going. This might be a good one for a book group. Me, I actually am a failure at book groups. I've thought about creating my own unbook book group where we get together monthly for wine and talk about all the books that we want to read. Yeah. So, you could bring this to your book group if you have one. Or you could consider this a one-time thing, right, where you bring a group of people together to read this book. If you do happen to get inspired to do that, and it's kind of an open discussion, please invite me. I would love to come and talk more about this book. I found it really interesting. Again, pros and cons. It's not perfect. It's what is, but it was very interesting. All right. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Symone, and then she can make a grand entrance. Okay. So I'm about to introduce you, Symone. Okay. So, a Democratic strategist and CNN political commentator, Symone rose to prominence as the press secretary for Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign. Yep. At 25, Symone demonstrated an uncanny command of the issues, earning her a place in history as the youngest presidential press secretary on record. Now, Symone draws from her experience on the national stage to provide analysis on political and social issues. She challenges the conventional wisdom that strong communities are only defined by what we have in common. Instead, she outlines the way our differences contribute to effective social movements and emboldens us to envision a better future. Please join me in welcoming Symone.
So this is Greetings, Madison, Wisconsin. How y'all doing? You know, I drove from Chicago last night because I just can't get my life together to get on the plane when I'm supposed to. So I have really enjoyed seeing the scenery of Wisconsin. So I'm very excited to be here. This is what I'll be talking about in my workshop. So please come see me. All right, well, I am super excited to be here. I'm very excited to help kick off this conference. And I want to tell you the lens through which I come to the work of racial justice and social justice. Then I want to talk a little bit about intersectionality. Then I want to talk a little bit about how folks can approach this work, the levels to the work of social justice and racial justice, some of the real issues, because some of the real progressive folks are the worst ones. Okay? We mean well, but sometimes we are the worst ones. And then I want to really open it up for a Q&A early so we can have a very robust conversation. I feel like I could talk to you about this for like an hour and a half, but I'd rather hear your questions and then speak back to you. Is that okay? All right, so the lens through which I come to the work of racial justice and social justice is through a couple things. But mainly it's through my juvenile justice work. So I am a native of Omaha, Nebraska, North Omaha to be exact. And while I was in high school, I found myself interning with one of my county commissioners, Mr. Chris Rogers. And part of Chris Rogers' portfolio was the juvenile justice work in Douglas County. That's where Omaha, Nebraska is. It's situated in Douglas County. And I found myself going to meetings with Commissioner Rogers specifically on the topic of juvenile justice, and if, you know, there's a lot of overlap in the juvenile justice work and the work that social workers and social justice folks do. And if you know anything about the state of juvenile justice in this country, it is an epidemic. Young people, particularly black and brown young people, are being disproportionately locked up in places all across this country. It's places where it's 3% black, and black kids are 55 to 60% of the incarcerated population. That would be Madison, somebody said. Well, there we go, okay? Epidemic. LGBTQ young people are disproportionately represented in the juvenile justice system. Young women, girls of color are disproportionately represented among juvenile justice populations, among incarcerated youth, system-involved young people. That means someone that has had a touch with the system, whether they've been arrested or they've been locked up in a facility. So in knowing this work, that's what got me interested in the juvenile justice work. I myself was not a system-involved young person, but I had family members. My own brother was a system-involved young person. And that's what brought me to the work. And I found myself sitting in rooms in my little fancy internship with no one that was formally system involved, with folks that, have only seen black kids in the courtroom, with people that really meant well but did not understand the lens through which these young people came to be involved in the juvenile justice system. And I remember after my second meeting, I walked out and I was like, Chris, where's all the young people? Where's the black and brown people? Where are the women in the room? And he said, well, that's why I brought you in there, to see that this is clearly an issue. So from that, I went and I got involved in the Nebraska Coalition for Juvenile Justice board that is a governor-appointed board. Then I went on to be involved in the National Coalition for Juvenile Justice, and I went on to sit as the chair of their Emerging Leaders Committee, and my sole purpose in doing juvenile justice work was to bring young people, millennial perspectives to policy conversations, particularly from the lens of system-involved young people of color. That's a mouthful. But that was the work I needed to do, and so I found myself sitting in rooms with well-meaning progressive people. I sat on the Federal Advisory Committee for Juvenile Justice, and I found myself sitting in rooms with caseworkers and social workers and probation officers and judges and lawyers and people that say they really care about these kids and philanthropists and folks that have literally never talked to a system-involved young person, but y'all gonna be the ones to reform the system? People that have literally never experienced an environment that these young people came from. And I found myself sitting in rooms with people that talk very disparagingly about these young people that they claim to want to help. And I couldn't understand why we were talking about juvenile justice reform, while we were talking about reforms for black and brown kids, but wasn't no black and brown kids in the room. You wouldn't go to the chicken convention trying to fix the chickens without some chickens at the table. So I was keenly confused about why we are talking about an epidemic that disproportionately affects both rural and urban communities, and there were barely any rural folks at the table. So that is the lens through which I come to this racial justice, social justice work. So then I graduated, because that's what happens. And I went to go be a community organizer. I was a community organizer before it was cool. Okay, now Barack Obama's a community organizer, so now everybody across the country talking about they do community organizing. I was an actual community organizer in my community of North Omaha. Again, and I found myself sitting in fancy spaces and places with well-meaning folks talking about, the work of the community. A little backstory on Omaha. It's one of the top 10 places to live and raise a family, apparently one of the top 10 places for young professionals, one of the most affordable cities in the United States of America. But at one point in time, it was also the #1 place for the percentage of black kids living in poverty. How we are the top 10 place for young okay. All right. So I found myself sitting in spaces and places and rooms with people that had no intersectional lens for the work that they were doing, the work that they claimed to care about. I found myself sitting in spaces and places with folks that really wanted to do well, but did not understand the backstory to the work. And so that's how I found myself in these social justice spaces and places. So I like to say I'm not an actual activist, I just play one on TV. I know the activists, and that helps me inform the work that I do. So one, I truly believe that strong communities, strong work comes from a big mixed bag of people at the room, at the table, engaging in this work. And I think that we have tricked ourselves over time to believe that, we should actually be colorblind in the work that we're doing. I do not subscribe to those colorblind politics. Because if you come to me talking about you colorblind, I'm confused. Because I'm a black woman, one word. But I think we've tricked ourselves in thinking that, perhaps we should just see the commonalities amongst the stuff that we got going on. And maybe if we just put our differences to the side when we come to the progressive table of the work, when we come to the table of doing the hard stuff, if we just put our differences aside and focus on what we have in common, that's how we'll move the ball forward. And I think that's flawed, actually. Because what I believe makes the work rich is the fact that we have various perspectives at the table. It's the fact that we have young people and seasoned folk, black folks and brown folks and Latino folks and Native American folks and Asian American Pacific Islander and LGBTQ and gender nonconforming and women and men and specifically more women of color and all of these folks in the room from different socioeconomic backgrounds, rural and urban. I think that's what makes us special. But we've been tricked for a really long time. I know some folks might have thought we lived in this post-racial America. Because, you know, a country that was founded in white supremacy, again, come to my session later. A country that was founded on the principles of white supremacy, X amount of years later, elected its first African-American president because we don't see color. And then I feel like maybe about a couple years later, folks woke up and realized, well, actually, maybe we don't live in this post-racial America. Perhaps racism is realer than it has ever been. And how do we combat that? How do we exist in our fancy spaces and places and do the real work of moving the needle in our communities if racism is as prevalent as it is? Well, clearly that means we have to engage in social justice work and racial injustice work. And I think sometimes these are buzzwords. Because what does that really mean? In my opinion, the intersection of racial justice and social justice work absolutely includes gender, it includes racism, it includes sexism. You have to account for intersectionality. Intersectionality is a phrase that was coined by a black woman. Her name is Kimberly Crenshaw. And it talks about basically that we cannot, like I just told you, I was a black woman, one word, intersectionality. So my existence in this world, in navigating through life, is not that I'm just a young person. It's not that I'm just black. It's not that I'm just a woman. It's not that I'm just a quote-unquote progressive. It's not that I'm just heterosexual. It is all those things mixed up in one, so that is my full identity, and we can't parse those things out. We cannot address racial inequality without addressing economic inequality. We can't address racial inequality with talking about class disparities. We can't really address racial inequality without talking about sexism and gender inequality. We can't address racial inequality without acknowledging that there's a lot of homophobia in the spaces and places in the work that we do. None of these things and issues happens in a vacuum. So you all have really amazing and great sessions today, and I hope that you take from that these are not different pieces that make up a whole, but rather they're interconnected strings. Have you ever done that activity where you got this ball of string and it's all tied up and everybody got to do the thing and come up out the thing and it's one long string? That is the work of racial inequality and social justice work. These ain't pieces to a puzzle. It's one long string balled up in a mess. A mess we have to do the work of untangling. You know, this year, folks just celebrated, the life and legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And this year is the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. You know when they took Dr. King out? Because, the FBI and the government, they terrorized him for a long time. The FBI repeatedly sent Dr. King letters telling him to kill himself and commit suicide. But they didn't take Dr. King out until he started talking about basically intersectionality, a poor people's campaign. The intersection of the social justice work that Dr. King was really engaged in at the basis of it was really about equity. He was talking about economic inequality, but I really would venture to say that it was equity. I think Dr. King realized that his fight for racial justice, his fight for civil rights for black people was not enough. That he went and fought for equality, but it was equity that he left on the table. And his Poor People's Campaign was his attempt to circle back and bring that thing full circle. He left equity on the table. We talk about racial inequality. What we really want to get to is a place of equity in our communities. I challenge you to talk about equity and not equality, because equality just means we got the same stuff. Equity means I might get something different than you because that's what I need. We need equity in the work that we're doing. The day before Dr. King was killed, he gave this I've been to the mountaintop. And he, I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said, I might not get there with you, but I've seen the promised land. And I'm not concerned because I know that we'll get there. 50 years later, ladies and gentlemen, we have not reached the promised land. The promised land is way far off down the road, actually. Because the same stuff Dr. King was fighting for 50 years ago, we're still talking about today. Today in America, the gap between the wealthiest people in this country and the poorest people in this country is the largest it has ever been. If you don't think that's connected to the social justice work that we're doing, to the racial inequality in our communities, you are sadly mistaken. That there are systems. Racism is a system. I know a lot of times we experience racism transactionally. And we believe that racism is a transactional experience. That's why you got y'all's president out here talking about, well, no, I've promoted black people and I have promoted women. Sexism is also a system. You can have black friends and you can promote women. You can interact with, the young black people at the Starbucks you go to every day and still be a little racist. I'm not telling y'all what I heard. Absolutely telling you what I know. And so I think that is the way that we should begin to think about the work. The last point that I want to make on this connection to Dr. King, to move a little forward, is that Dr. King was a radical revolutionary in his work. And I really believe that the work of racial inequality, this new age civil rights movement that inextricably ties the movement for women's rights, which is kind of crazy because everything is women's rights. But the movement for women's rights, the Black Lives Matter activists, civil rights, marriage equality, immigration activists, dreamers, environmental justice, these are all interconnected, and it requires us to be bold and radical in our approach, and revolutionary. Bold, radical, and revolutionary is the only thing that's ever moved the needle in this country and our communities. I mean, think about it. It was a bold, radical, and revolutionary thing for women to stand up and say, actually, I know we have vaginas, but we would like to vote. Bold, radical, revolutionary concept. It was bold, radical, and revolutionary for whom we now refer to as civil rights activists to say that I don't think we should be sitting at segregated lunch counters, and actually we should also be able to vote. It was bold, radical, and revolutionary for black women to say, and yes, please insert us into this conversation as well. It was bold, radical, and revolutionary to talk about marriage equality in this country. And now it is definitely bold, radical, and revolutionary to talk about permanent protections and citizenship for folks that we refer to as dreamers in America. Bold, radical, revolutionary change is the only thing that has ever moved the needle in this country. It has not been our institutions. That is why the people in this room are so important. If you really want to break down barriers to justice in our communities, if you really want to move the needle and work towards equity across the board, it's going to require you to do some things that you haven't done before. It's going to require you to truly, people talk about being an ally. I'm here for accomplices, okay? Because allies sometimes ain't all the way with you. We need accomplices in the work. The work of combating racial injustice, the work of social justice work, the work of breaking down and eradicating sexism and racism and bringing women to the forefront. That's the work of some accomplices. I need some accomplices in this work. So it's going to require us to do some things that haven't been done before, meaning it's going to require us to go to some places and spaces we've never been. It's going to require us to give some money to some people we really ain't gave no money to. It's going to require us to stop giving some money to those folks we always give money to. It's going to require us to put some different people on our boards and committees. It's going to require us to stop doing some particular programs. It's going to require us to bring some new people into the room. From planning to implementation, not just implementation, so it looks like we have some diversity on our program. Oh, okay. I'm making this up. Okay, that's fine. Not y'all, the other people outside the room. Not the people up in here. Of course not. So that is in my opinion, that is the real work, and we can break down and talk about specific instances, and I'd love to hear you all's questions, but that is how I wanted to set the stage. And so lastly, I'll leave you with this. It's a poem that reminds me of the work that we have in front of us, like why I do this work. It's called The Things That Haven't Been Done Before by Edgar Guest. And it mentions Christopher Columbus, which I'm not all the way here for, but you know, we can also talk about that later. The only Christopher I acknowledge is Wallace, and y'all can look that up. It's called The Things That Haven't Been Done Before by Edgar Guest. The things that haven't been done before, those are the things to try. Columbus dreamed of an unknown shore at the rim of a far-flung sky. Though his heart was bold and his faith was strong, as he ventured into dangers new, he paid no heed to the jeering throng or the fears of a doubting crew. Many will follow the beaten track with guideposts along the way. They live and have lived for ages back with a chart for every day. Someone has told them it's safe to go on the road they have traveled o'er, and all they ever strive to know are the things that were known before. Few will strike out without map or chart where never a man or woman has been. From the beaten path they draw apart to see what no man or woman has seen. There are deeds they hunger alone to do, though bruised and battered and sore. They blaze a trail for many who do nothing not done before. The things that haven't been done before, the tasks worthwhile today. Are you one of the flock that follow? Are you one that shall lead the way? Are you one of the timid souls that quail at the jeers of a shouting crew? Or dare you, whether you win or fail, strike out for a goal that's new? I believe that the work that we're talking about today, the work that we are all engaged in on a daily basis, is work that requires us to do the things that have not been done before. To think critically, to think innovatively, and to take risks, to move the needle and to make some folks uncomfortable. If you are not uncomfortable in this work, you're not doing your job. Thank you. I think we have some microphones.
People to come up with questions?
Yeah, we can come up with questions. I can be Oprah.
Working?
I'll
Is this
take
one
the
working?
thing.
Okay. And then Jason will get that one. Thank you. So you'd like people to raise their hands and we'll run around or meet you part way. Anyone have questions for Symone? This many people, somebody must. Back there.
There's one right back there.
Okay. I'll let Jason get that one. He's coming.
How do we get the really wealthy people to the table so that they are a voice in this conversation and will fund the work?
So the question is, how do we get the really wealthy people to the table so that they are a voice in this conversation and they will fund the work? That's an excellent question. So part of it is that power concedes nothing without a demand. And I think this is why the personal stories piece is really important, because particularly progressive funders, philanthropic folks, they respond to the stories. That is what I found in the juvenile justice work that we've done. And so when you bring engaged and involved young people to the table that have really heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching stories about their experiences, but also how whatever organization, group, whatever, how they are now doing work with them and it has literally helped change their lives, that is powerful to people. Folks want to give to something that they know is working. And a lot of times we leave the real people out, or we don't got no real people in our thing and we just out here asking for money time and time again, and we really have not engaged with the young people that we're saying we're engaging with, or the community or the segment of the population we're saying we're engaging with, and we don't have someone that's a partner with us to come and bring that powerful story. So I think part of it is seeking out those folks and attempting to bring them into the fold to demonstrate what it is that is happening before we make an ask for the dollars. That's how we gotta do it. We gotta bring them in, reel them in, do a briefing. I love the informational briefing. I just wanna brief you on the work that we're up to. Oh no, this is not a fundraising ask, it's just an informational briefing. Just want to let you guys know what we're up to. Oh my goodness, yes. Oh, and at the end, everybody's like, can I give? Absolutely. Tina is over here, and she can take your checks. We can also take credit and debit. We will not be taking Amex. So I'm also always here for the informational briefings. They work, y'all.
Here's another next question.
Hey, Symone. First of all, you are my favorite crooked media contributor in the world.
Shout out to the pod,
Yes.
pod team,
Friends of the
for all
pod.
the folks that listen to Friends
Thank
of the Pod.
you. So as you said, you're a community organizer. For somebody or for people who are interested in getting started or leading community organizing efforts within their own communities, what have you found has been the biggest pitfall that starting community organizers fall into, and what's been something that you've learned that you could share?
Yeah, you know what? I was actually, my boyfriend was a Ferguson protester. He's a Ferguson protester, and now he's like a fellow at Harvard, and I'm like, you done sold out. But I'm kidding. He's like, I'm still with the people. Are you though? You're at Harvard. I don't know. But we were actually talking about this very thing last night, in saying that, and he gave the example that when Ferguson happened, and everybody's familiar with Ferguson, when Darren Wilson shot and killed, murdered Michael Brown, and the police department in Ferguson left his body in the street for more than 4 hours, an uprising took place in Ferguson, Missouri, and it was a national spotlight that was shown on the issue that happens in places across this country. Unnamed young people being gunned down by police officers whose names we don't even know. But we talked about it. He said that when the national spotlight came and all these folks came in, these national organizing and protesting groups, the national Black Lives Matter folks, everybody. There were so many people that came in and just started activating on the ground without speaking to the actual folks that have been in the community for a really long time doing the work. They assumed that no one had been working on this issue that they were now also interested in. And I think that's a really important point to make, is that a lot of times, especially educated people, and this, like, we have all been guilty of this, but we read a whole lot of books, we've been in a lot of really great conferences, and we sit in very innovative rooms with people where we talk about how to save the world, and then we go out there in the community to implement it, not even asking the community about the work that they've been doing. We go to the community, we tell them this is what we're about to do, is that the community isn't qualified to speak about their experience. And so for anyone that is just starting the community organizing or the community partnership work, or for people that have struggled with that work in their organizations, I would venture to say part of the struggle, and as you start, you have to go directly to the community. So find the people in all levels that are activating and doing something. So in some places, it's your, urban leagues, your YWCAs, but then you've got some like outside activist folks that don't deal with them, but have their own programs, are running books and breakfasts and all kinds of stuff. And I think we have to take stock of the work that's happening on the ground and then see how we can plug in to support that work. Because sometimes the work is already happening, there's just no infrastructure to support the work. And in some spaces and places, actually, the work, there is no work, but there's an infrastructure. And so it depends on what area and space you're in. But it is really important that we come to the community first, and we come to the community authentically. That's an excellent question.
Other questions? Here we go.
So you said something during your opening speech about it's going to be individuals doing the work, not our institutions. The institutions aren't going to change themselves, essentially. But I'm wondering, especially since you referenced Dr. King, and Dr. King definitely used to great advantage the institution of Southern Christian churches and that kind of leadership in his work. Have you found any kind of institutions maybe similar to that in your work that have been really helpful to the kinds of things you're trying to do?
Excellent question. So it's a common misconception. Nowadays we talk about the civil rights movement as everybody was on the boat. Everybody was in there doing the work. All the churches were organizing. All the churches were connected. Everybody was ready to just flip the system. And the reality is it was a handful. It was a handful of people that were dedicated to doing the work. It was a handful of churches. Because some of these churches were really not about the work of the community. Some of these churches benefited from the status quo. Currently today, a lot of these churches benefit from the status quo. They are really not out there in their communities doing the work. Whether we're talking about combating racial inequality, sexism, Me Too, the LGBTQ movement, whether we're talking about homelessness, some of these churches are not in the community. But 50 years ago, we like to talk about it as everybody was doing the work. No, there was a concentrated few of people that were dedicated and wanted to do the work. And even in those institutions, everybody didn't want to do it. And so what I mean when I say that it's people that have always pushed the institutions is that, we talk about, JFK real glowingly, but he was more than happy to let black people continue to be, have dogs sicked on them in the street. I mean, these are just the facts. It was not like the protests and the images and the people and even the business community helped push Congress and JFK to decide to make a change. Individuals that got together and banded together and built a coalition. And so currently I see that there are a number of coalitions. There are some faith-based coalitions. The PICO network, I don't know if y'all are familiar with PICO, but that is a network of like what I would like to say radical revolutionary church people across demographics that are interested in doing the really hard work of building in our communities electorally, but also breaking down these systemic barriers that like racism and sexism and ageism have produced. And so I would encourage folks to look at the PICO network, because there's some, and there's some other, church-based networks that are trying to do a little work. But I think PICO is one of the strongest faith-based networks that I've seen that also has an electoral component to it, a political component. And I'm not talking about doing partisan work, because people say, oh, they don't like politics. What they mean is they don't like partisanship. But politics affects every single thing that we do. If you like to go to the grocery store and you want your lettuce to be green, that's politics. You want to be able to get cough syrup and you don't feel good, that is political. Wondering why some of our schools are labeled as not well, that's political. So there are definitely, the PICO network has been a coalition of faith-based folks that have identified themselves as people that are willing to do all types of the work and attack it from all sides.
Other questions here at the back? I'll try to meet you. Okay.
To this march, or we're going to go, we've got this thing we want you to get involved with, or what would you like to do? How would you like to move this forward? They're like, nah, that's not for us. Do you have any words of wisdom for how to get young kids engaged in this process? I mean, the ones who want to do it are going to be there, but is there a way that we can help them see how this really does affect their life?
Yeah, so I went and I spoke to a group of middle school and high school students the other day. It's about 300 of them, and they were not trying to be at this thing I was at. Particularly the first 3 rows looked real uninterested. They were just like, not paying, like they were not here. The parents literally dragged them out of the bed one Saturday morning to do this thing. And we had sat on this panel, and we were talking about the work that needs to happen, and they were so uninterested. And I stopped the panel, and I was like, and I asked these first 3 rows, and I was like, does anybody in the first 3 rows have anything that bothers them in their everyday life? And the kids were like, And I was like, oh, the 3 rows that was not playing with me 3 minutes ago, what bothers you? What's your name and what bothers you? And one by one, these young people got up and talked about all these things that like irritate them in their everyday lives. Some of which that we had not touched on this panel. And it clicked for me that they were uninterested because we weren't talking about something that they felt directly connected to. And so first and foremost, when there's always going to be this energetic, group of young people that are about this social justice activism that they've seen on the internet, that they would like to recreate in their communities, which I think is amazing. And those are young people we need to elevate and encourage to do this hard work. But a lot of these young people, and I say that as a young, like I'm a millennial, I'm 28, I just turned 28. So a lot of young people and people younger than me, they are dealing with so many other things in their lives. And so the question I think to ask is like not what you want to activate on, not what social justice ill you want to fix in the world, but like what bothers you in your everyday life? What irritates you? What really pisses you off? And then let them know that this is something that they can organize around. I like to use the example of that there are no energy drinks in the Washington, D.C. CNN green room, which is crazy because some days they be asking you to stay till 2 a.m. There's tea, there's no energy drinks. And so if I would like energy drinks in the Washington, D.C. CNN Green Room, my first thing is to take stock of all the people in my network, the CNN network, and ask them would they mind, because that's something that bothers me. So I want to know if anybody else would mind if there was energy drinks in the CNN Green Room. Not do you want them, do you mind? I don't really care if you want it, I want it. Do you mind if it's there? You got to ask the right questions, ladies and gentlemen. You have to ask the right questions. So once I identify people that do not mind if there are energy drinks in the CNN Green Room, I ask them, well, can I add you to my coalition? I'm building a team of people that don't mind if there's energy drinks in the CNN Green Room because I think we should have some. Okay, great. Do you know anybody else that doesn't mind? So now I have asked my folks to go out and get other people to join my coalition all around energy drinks in the CNN Green Room. So then I done wrote a letter, and I'm like, well, since y'all don't mind, can I put y'all's name on the letter? Here's a hashtag. Can you use a hashtag and like tweet something out, just one thing. Then I run down to the CNN politics team and say, well, we're organizing around energy drinks in the CNN Green Room. And then after all of this, I send my letter with my coalition of people that matter to the issue to our CNN boss, Rebecca, who I'm sure she's like, please don't ever do this. And now we have sent our list of demands to the leadership about we want the energy drinks in the CNN Green Room. If we can build a coalition around energy drinks, we can build a coalition around anything else, and I think that's what young people need to see and understand. We talk about change and activism at a very high, grandiose level. So it makes change and activism seem very complicated. It's not as simple. We just talked about Dr. King. Dr. King was a 26-year-old preacher that got together with his friends, literally, this is the like Ebonics version of what happened. He got together with his friends and was like, this ain't right. Anybody else got an issue? Folks was raising their hands about issues that they saw. What should we do? I don't know, maybe we can organize. Okay, what we gonna organize? Like, that's literally how it happened. So we talk about these folks in history as they're like some super like natural people, but these are people that just decided to do the work. So if that's how you describe it to young people in the community, that you know that Dr. King was a 26-year-old preacher, John Lewis wasn't always a congressman. He was like what someone would modern day describe as a meddlesome millennial that thought he knew a lot and always kept popping up in the meetings. Like, why are you like one of these activists? Like, that's literally what it was. And so if that's how you describe it to young folks, I think that helps pique their interest. But it has to be like an issue that is interesting to them. And maybe what bothers them is the fact that like when they go into the cafeteria, they feel alone. Maybe what bothers them is when they sit in class, they feel like their teachers don't understand their perspective. We can organize around that. There's a question right back here. And there's a question.
Buenos días, Symone.
Buenos dias.
Thank you so much for coming and also bringing up the DACA situation. I still feel that our communities of color are divided. We are divided no matter what. And as a Latina immigrant, I've been asked numerous times to do presentations here and there, but I feel that if you bring it up, this situation that's currently occurring with our young dreamers, I think you're gonna have another audience and people are gonna listen to you. It just gets tiring, gets lonely when us, as Latinos, or have to talk about this issue. And I just wanted to thank you for at least, mention the DACA and what's happening right now. You also mentioned, it's surprising to me, I've been in this country for the past 32 years. And I'm not very fan of, the faith organizations and this and that, but guess what? Lately, the faith community is coming and asking, what can we do? Can I do this fundraising? Can I help Voces de la Frontera? What do you guys need? People need passports, it's expensive, all of that. And I just wanted to encourage people here in this room, please help us.
So I thank you for that. I want to make sure we talk about this, because y'all can clap for that, clap for that. We got a whole thing about racial justice, women with the X at the forefront, which there's a whole session about, so I'm just about to do a little promo for the sessions. Please go to these sessions. And a lot of times we talk about racial injustice work and social justice work, and we only want, and it skews towards talking about like black and white people. Like white supremacy is really real, like there are key issues there that have never been addressed, but like white supremacy affects a lot of different folks. And particularly in the issue of immigration reform and Dreamers right now, I'm disappointed with my progressive community. I'm mad, I'm pissed off, because folks would want to tell you that this is not who America is, this isn't who we are. I don't know how we got here. This is who we've always been, okay? This is who we've always been. And I just told you 50, 60 years ago they were fine with black people, with dogs being sicked on them in the streets on national television. Maybe 90 years, 100 years before that, it was fine with black people being lynched, hung up on trees as decorations in communities across this country. We have not engaged in humane immigration policies in this country, regardless of whatever side of the aisle you sit on. And so when folks talk about the quote-unquote dreamer issue, as though these aren't real folks' lives on the line, as though every single day that Congress does not act, 122 people do not lose their protective status and their lives currently live in limbo. As though since September, over 15,000 folks have lost their protective status, cannot work, and do not know what is happening. As though since 2009, more folks have been deported in this country than any other time in history. Like, this is a whole epidemic. Yes, 2009, that was President Obama. So it is imperative, again, I talked about intersectionality. It is imperative that when we talk about the struggles, when we talk about addressing racial inequality, that we have to talk about the fact that there are very well-meaning people in our circles that are using language like chain migration. We have to talk about the fact that there are very well-meaning people in our social justice tables that are like, well, I think we need to take care of the Americans first. Why can't they just immigrate legally? Like, there's a real lack of nuance and understanding in a lot of our communities and tables. But we have to be intentional about having those conversations. These are uncomfortable conversations to have, but we have to be intentional about them. So yes, we need to offer support to our immigration activists and our immigration activist organizations and the Dreamers in this time, but we also have to do more. We have to give more than just lip service, and we really need to break down these barriers. And part of breaking down the barriers is having very intentional conversations that are uncomfortable conversations to have. There was a question here, and then we'll go here.
Actually, it wasn't a question, it was a comment. When she was talking about, you know, you give me that mic, it's going to be too loud. Can you Okay, no, I trained for the limits of my voice projects. My point that I wanted to make, and I do want you to kind of speak to this, is the division or the diversity in ages. Young people of color, if they become radical, people call the police on them.
Oh, absolutely.
So when I heard her saying, how do I involve them? Well, you can't tell them at the same time, voice your opinion, be radical, but only do it in a way that's comfortable for us. So how young people voice their disappointment and then given permission to join the struggle, we've got to be comfortable being uncomfortable. I like when you started talking about being radical. Being radical is not neat, and it's not popular. It's not a new concept. You know, I'm a sister from the 70s.
Come on.
Okay? It's not new, but it comes with much blood, much sweat, and many, many tears. And people, relationships are forged through that. But there were lives that were lost. So when you ask young people to put yourself out there, then somebody's got to be willing to catch them.
So there are levels to engagement, okay? And when you, it is, let me break this down. So yes, it is absolutely true that if we are asking, you're asking young people to come out and join this march, do this and do that, there's a real like possibility that like they could be arrested just depending on where they are, just for being there and standing there. Particularly young people of color. That the other young people who are non-melanated, do not experience this type of interaction with the police. Yes, now I'm melanated. Look that up. So there are levels and layers, and we have to be intersectional in our approach. And so what works for one group of young people does not necessarily work for another group of young people because they have an added set of challenges, which is why I take it back to asking these young people what irritates and bothers them, and then maybe furthermore asking them how are they comfortable engaging. What would make you uncomfortable? And then tell me why this makes you uncomfortable and this makes you comfortable. The other point I think I need to make is that radical and revolutionary is not just marching. It's not just like putting your bodies on the line in the street doing a die-in. Like, that is, no. That's one form. I like to tell folks, I can't be out there laying in the die-in and stuff because I need to be on TV telling them why y'all at the die-in. I can't be getting arrested. Who gonna tell them why they locked y'all up? Who is gonna say it? So y'all need to call me and tell me what's happening so I can be there. But it is a radical revolutionary thing for me to sit where I sit talking about white supremacy. So we have to understand for ourselves and then for the young people that we deal with every day that engagement and activism looks different in different places and spaces. And there's not one way to engage. There's not one way to combat racial injustice. And so you have to find your piece of the pie. Dr. Carr from Howard University, who's the African American Studies professor, always says, he was like, we need some folks who are willing to go out there and shake and break the system. Some people that are willing to turn this world upside down, flip the tables over. He's like, then we need some lawyers to get those people out of jail. He said we also need some advocates to go to the advocacy table to explain why people are flipping things over and what could be done. We need some people that work for the politicians to encourage the politicians and the elected officials about what they need to do. So there are different levels. And all of that in some way, shape, or form is activism. And so there's just not one type of activism. Frankly, I don't want nobody to ask me to go to another march. I'm not marching. I ain't marched last weekend. I was in Miami on the beach. I'm not marching. Because I don't need to march. Some of y'all need to go out and march. Some of y'all need to go out and march and hold the sign because you have not been an accomplice nor a good ally. Some people do not need to go out and march. We need to engage in other spaces and places. And we have to be okay and understanding of the different levels of engagement. There was a question right here. This is good. I'm feeling good, y'all. I had 2 shots of espresso before I came up in here. So I'm on it, I'm ready.
So the reality is, many of us work in institutions and agencies that are steeped in white supremacy values. And
everywhere is steeped in white supremacy values, though, to be clear. Again, come to my session.
So that's the reality that we're working in. And when we challenge that system, how do we deal with basically white fragility and being a survival in the system challenging that? So, because you're going to bump up against resistance. And you also have to understand people are at this certain learning point. So how do you stay humble in the work and be understanding of others but still bring others along? Because some people don't even know how white supremacy values show up even. Like, you have to educate on that. So, like, there's a cost to being the one saying, hey, these are white supremacy values that we're adhering to.
One could argue in some spaces and places, y'all can't use the term white supremacy because they're not ready. So we have to couch it as something else. I think there's a gross disparity in the way in which we are engaging with some particular constituencies or individuals. And I know no one in this room is actively, this is how you gotta talk to people. You can't use the term white supremacy with some people. In some institutions, because I still want y'all to be able to go to work every day. I don't want anybody to push y'all out because y'all come to work talk about white supremacy and where you work, they're not ready. Because I want you to be there to be able to combat the system. But again, we have to be intentional in our language, but also very intentional in our approach. And so part of it is, I think it's important, that's why I said some people need to march. It's really important that there are like accomplices that do not look like me. Because it's one thing for the woman of color or the person of color in the office to always be standing up in the meeting, to always be putting that proposal forward, and they're like, oh Lord, here comes Symone with this damn Black people, young people, engagement, militant proposal. Yet again, she's gonna ask us about these black kids. But it's a whole nother thing for Tom. It's a whole nother thing for Tom to pop up in that meeting like, well, what if we did this program on the so-and-so? And they're like, oh, Tom, that's actually a good idea. Do you have any thoughts about what it could look like? I don't know. I might get with Symone and Sherry, though, and see if they have other ideas. Okay, get with that and bring it back. It's one thing for, Sherry to pop up in the meeting always talking about what we have to do for women, how we need to be intersectional in our approach to women, how there are folks that are out there that are gender non-conforming, non-binary, and that's the kind of work that we need to do. It's a whole nother thing for Joe. Joe to pop up and be like, well, what about the women? Joe's terminology may not always be up to par, but we appreciate, we appreciate that Joe is engaging on the issue. And y'all are laughing, but it's true. It is true. And so this is why when I talk about finding accomplices in the work, who are your office accomplices? Who are some folks even at the higher levels at your organization that maybe don't all the way get it, but they're willing to work with you and learn? Who maybe really aren't all the way as progressive as they think they are, but they think they're progressive enough for you to get in there and help them along. Those are the kind of accomplices that we need to move the work forward, but the change isn't gonna happen overnight. And so sometimes it is piecemeal. That doesn't mean our approach is incrementalist. That means sometimes we have to be radical in our approach in engaging our accomplices. But sometimes what we can come back with at the moment is not as revolutionary as we would like. That is the reality of institutions. That's why I don't work for nobody. Because I just, I can't do that. But y'all do. And that work is really important. So I encourage you to find accomplices in your organizations that you can pull along. Sometimes you can't be the one to present the proposal. You gotta let Joe, Sherry, Tom do it. Sometimes I do need to present the proposal though, but it's on some stuff that they never would have thought I'd come in there and talking about. Come in there and talk about saving the whales. They're like, you care about the whales? There's whales where I'm from. I do care about the whales. Because I'm intersectional in my approach to social justice. Other questions?
I would just encourage you to also add economics to your presentation or to what you're presenting. As a member of the LGBTQ, I can't even keep up with all the letters anymore, community. My activism comes from economics. I follow what the Human Rights Campaign puts out every year, the Corporate Equality Index, and I shop in stores that are LGBT affirming. I don't shop in ones that are not. I look at stores like, I know a lot of people who go to places like Walmart. I look at how Walmart treats their employees and how they don't give them insurance, and yet I know tons of people who go there. So a lot of my activism as I have aged out of being radical has to do with what my economic impact can have and what stores I don't go to and who I don't support. The other piece I'd like to add is that Andrew Sullivan, a gay activist years ago, made a comment that if you want a place at the table, you have to have table manners. So getting up and screaming doesn't always answer the question. Sometimes, depending upon how you present your platform, has a bigger impact on the people who are listening. So just wanted to
I want to expand upon, what's your name, sir?
Gary Cohen.
Thank you, Gary Cohen. Oh. Do people always joke that you're the Trump Gary Cohen? And they're like, who are you? Love it. Love it, love it, love it. I'm sorry, it's hilarious. So, Gary makes a really important point in that the last piece that you noted about who can go, so during the campaign, so I worked for Bernie Sanders, and yes, I was his comms person, but when I first started working there, I don't know if you noticed, but there were people that were hopping on the stage interrupting his speeches. And I was like, yo, I don't know what y'all heard, but if somebody hops on the stage while I'm over there and they try to take my microphone, I don't think the optics will be good, and I can't tell y'all what I'm gonna do. So literally, I had to say this, and they were looking at me like I was crazy, and I was like, so we have to figure out like something here. And so we would go and we would have meetings for like 3 months. Every time we went to a city, we would go and we have meetings with various activists in that city. And like they wouldn't hop on the stage because I was like, if I hop on the stage, no meeting. Meeting is after, no interruptions. You can come to the meeting with Bernie Sanders. No cameras, you can come. We can have a conversation. But what I found was folks were sending the folks to the meetings that did not have good table manners, that were not the folks that should be sitting at the advocacy table trying to advocate on the policy platform. And there are, again, when I talk about that there's levels, some people need to be in the streets flipping things over. And some people are the folks that we send in the room because we need credible spokespeople for whatever movement we are engaging in. And so we have to have and build up credible spokespeople. And we have to make sure that we are building up credible spokespeople that look differently than the spokespeople that we think are supposed to come in the room. Because in all actuality, when I was growing up, people told me I talked too fast, too loud, and too much, and I would never be a public speaker. And I was like, today I get paid to speak to people. And like literally to speak on behalf of people. But someone encouraged me and helped build me up to be a credible spokesperson for my issue. And so we do need folks with good table manners, but we have to make sure that the folks that we're building up at the table manners don't fall into the traps of what we think people should look and be like. You know what I mean? So that's the first thing. To the point on economics, absolutely. But again, there's levels to the economics conversation. So some folks do not have the ability or the privilege not to shop at the Walmart. But the people that do have the privilege not to shop in the Walmart need not be shopping there. So there's levels. So for the people that don't have the privilege not to shop at the Walmart, I think about A Day Without a Woman that happened March 7th last year. And there were so many people. Are y'all familiar with A Day Without a Woman? For those people that aren't familiar, it was a day that the folks with the Women's March and other organizations, allied organizations, put together, and they said this is the day where if you are a woman in America, do not go to work. Don't shop, don't do nothing, because we want to show America what it looks like when women don't show up. Very powerful concept. There was lots of blowback from working class women, because guess what? Working people are also women. I know we hear about working class white men all the time, but working people are also women and women of color. And there was a lot of blowback from, working women and women of color saying, there are so many women that do not have the privilege to not just show up and not go to work. They can't just show up places. And so how can I participate as a woman that still has to go to work? So somebody was like, oh, well, you can wear red. You could do this, you could do that. So there are different symbols. And so I think that's the same way with our economics. So everybody can't not shop somewhere. Because I just told you about economic inequality. So sometimes folks are hamstrung in the places that they are. And so what does activism economics look like for them? This is deep, y'all. It's the espresso. What time is it? We got time for what? 2 more? 3 more, maybe?
1 or 2, depending how complicated they are and how long the answer is.
Keep it short, Symone, I got you.
So, other questions now that we had said that? Where am I missing? Oh, wait, thank you.
I'm also really loud, so, but I'll try. Try the microphone. How do we deal, and maybe you don't have the answer, but it's exhausting to deal with the constant diet of crap that the media feeds to people that we're dealing with, and not you, of course.
Some people might say I'm part of the diet of crap, depending on what channel you're watching.
And the media that's controlled by the white supremacy, by the white power. I mean, in a huge way that is just exhausting day after day to say, that's not right, that's not true, and it's just the talking points that's thrown at people, and they just buy it, and they swallow it, and then they live it. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, so as part of this corporate media apparatus that is sold out, that's what the people say, you have sold out, really? So a couple things. So one, I am so glad that there are so many new people in America that are waking up to the media bias. Because there are so many people in this country that have lived through and with the grotesque impact that the media has on our everyday lives. I'm talking about people of color. I'm talking about young urban people. Like, the media has been disparaging some folks for a really long time. Has been putting out falsehoods about the lives that people live for a really, really long time. And now, I think the media has expanded its repertoire of the BS that they would like to talk about and spew. So I want to make that point. It's important to understand, especially in this hyper-polarized, hyper-connected world, about media consumption. And I just wish that on college campuses across the country and in corporate spaces and places, that folks start having programs and whatnot about media consumption and really breaking down and unpacking the media. Because nowadays, folks do not understand that when they turn on the television, they're usually not looking at an actual reporter. People come up to me all the time and say, oh, I want to get into journalism, I want to be a journalist, and I'm like, boo, I'm not a reporter. I have a business degree. My job is to give you, they booked me to be on a show to give you a partisan point of view. Now, I believe in being actual and factual when I get on television, and so I try to make sure that I'm not saying anything that's not true, but every partisan that they pay to get on TV doesn't believe in that. And then you've got media outlets that are, again, controlled by specific corporate interests. I encourage everybody to look up the Sinclair Tribune deal that's currently being negotiated, and has gone to review from the Department of Justice. Because if the Sinclair Tribune deal goes through, Sinclair Broadcasting Company will now control more than 72% of local television stations across the country. And Sinclair is known to inject extremely conservative programming into their networks. And if they control 72% of the local media, and more than 75% of people are saying they still get their news from their local media, that's important. That's concerning. They're controlling major media markets like WGN in Chicago, WPIX. Like, these are all things that are currently happening. So check out my crooked conversation with the FCC commissioner on this issue. So it's important to understand, like, break down media consumption and who people are looking at when they're watching television. Because the majority of folks do not understand the difference between a commentator, an analyst, and a correspondent. And when you don't know the difference, when you don't understand who you're listening to, that the person that is sitting up there as an analyst is literally only paid to give what they believe is their objective opinion, not the facts, but their objective opinion about what's happening. And it's the correspondent that is there to give you the news, the reporter that is there to give you the facts. Then we get confused. And that's why we're repeating stuff that Sean Hannity's saying when he's not even a real reporter.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and then we need to, so we can stay in our time frame. So, thank you.
Hi. Just wanted to, I was going to touch on something earlier that someone already asked, but how do you keep motivated? How do you keep going? Can you talk about self-care? Because as one of those women of color who, when I show up at a meeting and I raise my hand, I am literally get the, the eyes rolling, and people tend to then, just disengage because they know where I'm coming from and they know what, I'm always for the underdog. So can you talk about how do you keep going when you're just surrounded sometimes by people that are maybe well-meaning, but just really aren't at that space yet and continue to not? So it's more about the self-care.
Absolutely. So this is a great point to end on, I believe. So one, what continues to motivate me is the poem that I gave y'all. And also the fact that I know that when I show up, that there's probably not anybody who's going to say what I'm going to say. And because I know that when I show up in the room, there's no one's really going to say what I'm going to say, specifically how I'm going to say it, I got to show up in the room. Like, I have to show up in the room because I view myself as an accomplice. And if I'm really an accomplice that stands in the gap for X, Y, and Z and stands on the shoulders of A, B, and C, I have to show up. Last year, actually, on the Day Without a Woman, my father had a stroke. And I raced back to Omaha, Nebraska. I did TV that morning. I raced back to Omaha, Nebraska, and 2 weeks later, my father was gone. He had a stroke at the gym. He got off the treadmill. He went to the front desk, and he told the lady that he really did not feel well, and she should call 911. And that was the last time he ever formed an actual sentence. So I go home, I spend 2 weeks in Omaha, Nebraska, sleeping on the floor of my father's hospital room. And the day before he died, I had a speaking engagement in Toronto that I couldn't get out of because I'd already taken these people's money. And I wasn't gonna get the money back. And my mom was like, go, 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 your dad wants you to go, da-da-da. And I was like, oh, I don't wanna go, da-da-da. But so I went. And I get off the stage in Toronto, and I go to bed, and I wake up at like 3 a.m., and my mom calls me 2 hours later and told me that my dad passed a couple hours before. So I go back home, I go back to Nebraska, we have his memorial service, and then the day after, I leave Nebraska, and I'm somewhere else doing a speaking engagement and workshop with these young people. And a little girl asked me at the workshop, she was like, what's the hardest thing you've ever had to do? Hardest thing you've ever had to encounter? And I was like, to stand here on this stage right here today. My father died 2 weeks ago, and we had his memorial service yesterday. And I said, I'm standing here because I believe that the best way to honor my father's life and legacy is to continue to do the work. And that I truly, truly, truly believe that we are in a real moment and a real movement. And that my daddy was proud of me. And he was proud of me because I continued to show up. And that's just something I'm dealing with. Who knows what the people in this room and other rooms are dealing with? I think everybody is connected to somebody or has a story about someone that lost someone last year, that was affected by the hurricanes, that's been affected by these disastrous immigration policies, that had a financial breakdown, maybe lost a job. And so many people, somebody who's parent, person, loved one had cancer. So many people, though, continue to show up every day in their own spaces and places and do the work. And so what I think about every single day is that, Lord, like I'm dealing with stuff, Lord knows what the other people that we show up to work with every day are dealing with. But they continue to show up. And so if everybody else I know who are dealing with things way more egregious than I am continue to show up, I can continue to show up too. Because that's the real work. Nobody said this is gonna be easy. This is hard stuff. It's uncomfortable stuff. Sometimes you have to just sit back. You know, if I wanna break away, I go to the nail shop. And then I leave the nail shop and I go right back to work. Because that's what this moment requires. And so for anybody that is feeling like downtrodden with the work and like it's just so much and it's overbearing and so much is happening so quickly and it feels like we can't really get our bearings before something else comes and knocks us over. That's absolutely true. But we have to continue to show up every single day because we're real accomplices, we're amazing allies, and we stand on the shoulders of some people. And I think if we want to honor the life and legacy of the people that we say we love, the folks that we really say that we're out here fighting for, we show up every single day, and that's what I try to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.